Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann-Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather we live in extraordinary ones where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives to share resources to help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes and sign up for our newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. You can also become a supporting member of our podcast with a small monthly donation. Look for Embodiment Matters at patreon.com. Hello, friends. It's Erin here, and I'm so delighted to share with you this gorgeous conversation Carl and I recently got to share with John Seed and Skye Cielita Flor, both of whom live in Australia, and both of whom are dedicated carriers of the body of work known as Experiential Deep Ecology, and also known in North America as the work that reconnects. There's so much I could say about both of these magnificent people, and I hope you'll go online to read more about them and their extraordinary life histories. You can read more about John at johnseed.net, and you can read more about Skye at deepearthdreaming.world. John has been an activist, organizer, facilitator, writer, musician, so many things since the 1970s, a dedicated earth protector. And he has so much wisdom to share in such a humble and beautiful, invitational way. Skye is a wonderful also teacher of this work as well as other bodies of work. She's also a mother of a very adorable little just turned 2-year-old. And one of the things that I found really heartening in this conversation is the dynamic between these two people, really holding John as the kind of elder the world needs now. I was really moved that as we were organizing to have this conversation, he wanted to invite Skye, who is a brilliant young woman, to participate along with him. And I love the absence of hierarchy, the deep presence of shared respect and shared commitment to thriving ecosystems and thriving human life between the two of them. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation very much. And there's so much about awakening, resilience, how to orient during these times, dissolving that persistent illusion of our separation from earth and ecosystem and life. And I think you're going to greatly enjoy the conversation. I want to mention also that if you resonate with the perspectives in this conversation, I hope, as I said, you'll follow both John and Skye through their respective websites. And I also want to share that my dear friend Leilani Navar and I are going to be teaching a class in the spirit of the work that reconnects, inspired by the work that reconnects. And we're going to have wonderful guest teachers, including Cynthia Jewers, who we've interviewed a few times on our podcast, Frances Weller, who we've also interviewed a few times on our podcast, Rosemary Watola Trummer, the incredible poet we just had a podcast conversation with that is also wonderful, and Lydia Violet Hartunian, who is the founder of the School for the Great Turning. You can find more about that at our website, embodimentmatters.com, under events. And on that page, you'll also find that my beloved Carl and our dear friend Alexandre Joden are offering a men's group that starts in February. It's called Men of Depth and Soul. And there's a wonderful connection there in that our dear friend Alexandre is also dear friends with Skye. He used to live in Australia, and I just love finding these deep heart kindred beings around the world. And the men's group is taking applications and is also going to be wonderful. We hope you enjoy this conversation and know you will. As always, you can sign up for our mailing list at embodimentmatters.com, and you can support our podcast through our Patreon at patreon.com/embodimentmatters. Thanks so much for listening. We're grateful for your support your enthusiasm, your care about this work, and we always appreciate you spreading the word and leaving reviews. Enjoy the episode.
So welcome, John and Skye. It's so good to be in conversation with you. And Skye, you feel like, though we haven't met in person, you feel like such a soul sister, and I love the mythopoetic animist circles that we've overlapped in over the years. And John, it's such a delight to meet you. You are such a legend in the the realms of deep ecology and have been doing this good work for so long. So it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking, John, you've been devotedly doing this work since Carl and I were toddlers and before Skye was born. And it's just like, wow, finding our way to this realm that you've been working in devotedly for so long. It's just really exciting to have this conversation with you. Thank you. I would love to just start for people who aren't familiar with the language of deep ecology. I just love that language so much. But to ask maybe each of you to speak to what that means and if it feels related, how it relates to embodiment.
Well, maybe I'll begin and say that I came to deep ecology in some desperation in the early 80s after being involved in many direct actions that helped to protect Australian rainforests in 3 different states over 5 years with a huge amount of success. However, by the mid 80s, it became clear that for every forest that was being protected in the previous decade, 1,000 forests had been lost. And clearly, there was no way to save the planet one forest at a time. That unless we could address the underlying psychological or spiritual disease that afflicts modern humans, there was clearly these actions would be of no particular consequence in addressing the extinction spasm, which was clearly underway with hundreds of species disappearing daily, even back 40 years ago. And so it was these questions that led me to deep ecology. Deep ecology is a philosophy of nature. The term was coined by the late Arnie Ness, the professor of philosophy from Oslo University. And according to him, underlying all of the symptoms of the environmental crisis is the illusion of separation between human beings and the rest of the earth. And that he said that this illusion of separation was a result of anthropocentrism or human-centeredness, the idea that human beings are the center of everything. And this flies in the face of both the science of ecology and the wisdom of indigenous peoples that understand that the world is more like a web and we are one strand in that web rather than a pyramid with human beings on the top. And so that's, I guess, a brief outline of deep ecology, and we can go further into that, of course, but I'd love to hear Skye's answer.
I mean, I'll just piggyback on that, John, and just speak to the embodiment part, because what John teaches here in Australia, we call experiential deep ecology. So as he named, the term deep ecology came from the philosopher Arnie Ness, and Joanna Macy's version of this work, the work that reconnects, and John's version of it, the experiential deep ecology, are both really rooted in the language and the frameworks and the philosophy. And then, of course, as we know, the stories and the poetry that come as part of that as well. But the focus is the experiential element. The point of the workshop is to take people through these processes in community that support the actual experience of oneself as the strand in the web of life, basically, this experience of interbeing. And, there's layers and kind of stages that sometimes people experience that. Not everyone has that numinous experience of being Earth or Gaia embodied as, Aaron or Carl or Skye in the first workshop, but there is always some level to which that experiential process starts to break down that split in the psyche between one's experience of wholeness and the disenchanted separation, what my partner and I call citizen consciousness, that most of us inhabit on the day-to-day. Yeah, that would be my answer.
So going on from there, I'd say that Arnie Ness famously pointed out that ecological ideas won't save us, that what's needed is ecological identity, ecological self. And self, of course, is a kind of ambiguous term because it could refer to something that is quite not, not physical. But I take self to be the whole self, and so that the ecological identity refers to things like the fact that every cell in my body is descended in an unbroken chain from the first cell of life on Earth, and that has huge implications. Like, there's nobody that would deny that as a scientific and an ecological idea, but to practice experiential processes, rituals, ceremonies that allow one to experience that larger layer of oneself changes everything.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I'm just thinking, I've had a couple people in the last few months we teach embodiment work and meditation, and how surprised they are when it's less human and self-centric, I think, than they imagine as they're approaching it. And I just want to share that I first heard of you, John, when Joanna Macy told the story of you saying, I'm not a person defending the rainforest. I'm a part of the rainforest defending itself. And it really struck me at the time. The more and more I inhabit, the self of interbeing, rooted in interbeing, the more it seems so strange that we hold ourselves so separately. But I'm really curious about what you find, either of you or both of you, are most potent practices to help people slip out of that too tight shoe of small separate self. For listeners who also might be able to connect with some experiential sense of it just in this conversation, what helps people access that?
Well, maybe I'll start by saying that not long after I met Joanna, and she totally blew my world apart with the processes that she was carrying, what she at that time called despair and empowerment, and what she now calls honoring our pain for the world. About a year later, after we'd created the first of the experiential deep ecology processes, the Council of All Beings, together, I wrote to her saying that, to my astonishment, I kept trying new processes and all of them worked. And I couldn't understand it. How could that be? This wasn't something that I had any experience in. And her reply was that if there's any separation between ourselves and the living earth, it's all coming from us. The earth never pushed us away. So that she felt that the moment that we make a gesture of reconciliation by gathering together with a circle of people with the shared intention to dispel that illusion, then the earth comes rushing in. And what that means is that it hardly matters what you do, that the intention does all of the heavy lifting, and almost anything that you do after that will serve as a vehicle for the kind of expansion of consciousness or the expansion of identity that invariably takes place in the course of these workshops.
So beautiful.
Yeah, I've got goosebumps with that. Yeah, because it seems like so much of the learning that has to happen in these realms isn't a kind of addition practice, but it's this kind of remembering back or peeling off layers of anesthesia or ways that we've forgotten that long, long ancestry that we all share.
Yeah,
Yes,
for me, it looked a little different in the sense that I spent a number of years deeply immersed in a full-time immersion or study traditional Shipibo curanderismo, which meant that I lived in a indigenous animist community practicing traditional folk medicine. It was, for me, it was there that I had a very strong experience of whole perception, we might call it, living earth perception. And it was the return to not return to Australia. I moved to Australia in 2017 and was then deeply immersed very quickly living in the city in its opposite. And I experienced the deep split between the two and the grief of that, and this like recognition in that return around what the systems that we are inhabiting on a daily basis are actually founded on, and had a very strong direct embodied experience of the difference in the way that those perceptions create worlds, create experience, create relationship or non-relationship in what it is for most people in the West, with regards to the other than humans and this larger planetary consciousness or Gaian consciousness. And I think for me, it was almost like reverse engineering, like how do I live here and stay in contact with this incredible transmission that I receive, because it's just not possible for everyone to go and live in the Amazon jungle or drink medicine all the time. I don't agree with the dependence on that. It's not sustainable on many levels. And for me, deep ecology and John's work came to me in that almost like dark night where I was experiencing an enormous amount of grief, and every process that he did was significant. I think the first thing that really cracked me was the grief ritual, and it was my first time participating in a truth mandala, a grief ritual, and it could not have been at a better moment where I was experiencing personal grief, global grief, this grief of shifting place and worldview, and then going from that into John's particular flavor of experiential deep ecology that really emphasizes deep time practices and deep space, the universe story, in ways that Joanna touches on, but the work that Reconnects doesn't tend to go into it as deeply. And that was so significant to have that after a grief ritual. And I feel like, all the bodies of work that I have been apprenticing to since then are in service of this shift in perception, this reclamation of animist perception, living earth, enchanted awareness, what we might call it, yeah.
Well, to go further, you were asking the question, Carl, in terms of people wanting specific things that they might be able to practice in order to understand this. And I think talking about the intention may not be very satisfying from that point of view. So I'd like to talk about one of the processes that we do, and which is very accessible to anyone, anywhere. And there's a sort of a backstory to it. One of the deep time processes that we do in the workshop, usually on a Saturday night after dinner, when everyone's done the grief ritual earlier in the day, is called the Cosmic Walk. And it's a ceremony created by Sister Miriam Therese McGillis from Genesis Farm in New Jersey, who was a colleague of the late Thomas Berry, who was the, I guess, the most celebrated progressive Catholic theologian of his day, the latter half of the last century. And he, quite late in his life, had an epiphany where he realized that he was now a geologian and no longer a theologian, that his attention turned from the conception of divinity that he'd had all of his life to the earth itself as being the source of everything, including every human idea about the nature of the universe and the nature of the divine. And he called upon poets and artists and musicians to tell the story of the universe in such a way that it becomes the creation myth of our time. And many responded to this, and one of those was Sister Miriam, who created the Cosmic Walk. So in the Cosmic Walk, we have a circle. I use a ball of hemp that's 50 meters long, representing the 13.7 billion year story of the universe. And that means every meter along this ball, which is a spiral now on the floor, represents 274 million years in the emerging story of the universe. And there are 23 candles placed appropriately around that spiral. And with each, there's a story of the universe emerging. So the first candle in the center tells the story of the flaring forth of the universe in the first place, and the extraordinary fact that anything exists at all. And so we just stop and we honor that, and then we move around. So about 2,000 million years into the story of the Earth, so halfway back to when life began on Earth, we were still single-celled organisms floating in the ocean, and we needed new sources of food, and this was accomplished by the emerging of a new molecule which had never existed before, chlorophyll, and this allowed our ancestors to capture photons of light from the sun and thereby extract carbon from CO2, and this became the new source of energy. However, one consequence of this was the pollution of the world with oxygen, which was a toxic poison to the anaerobic bacteria of that time. It took 1,000 million years, another billion years, for that to have serious consequences, because until then, the oxygen merely oxidized iron dissolved in the ocean, and all of the iron that we mine today for our civilization accumulated at that time, one molecule at a time, through the oxygen released by single-celled bacteria. And but eventually, after a billion years, oxygen began to accumulate, and the next miraculous emerging property of the universe was the heme molecule, where our ancestors learned to metabolize that oxygen, and this was the ancestor of the hemoglobin protein that carries oxygen through all animal bodies. And so the process that we use from this is a kind of a breath meditation, but it's not, it's actually the physical bodily inhalation and exhalation of gas, that as we exhale the gas, we remember this story, and we remember that the CO2 that we're exhaling, although it's had a bad rap of late for good reasons, we've been producing far too much of it, but it has a very important and honorable history, and that this is the very breath of life for the green things in the world. And so the process consists of sitting, looking at something green. So I'm looking at a tree outside my window, but it could be a single blade of grass, or it could be a flower in a pot 100 stories up a skyscraper, but something green and living, and we exchange gases with that. With each out-breath, we make a gift of our exhalation, and with each in-breath, we accept a gift in return. And we try to move between a kind of sense of generosity and abundance with the out-breath to a sense of gratitude with the in-breath. And this very quickly connects us to our ecological identity, that this very quickly changes our experience of who we are. And most, like Arnie Ness called for community therapies to heal the illusion of separation. And Joanna and I started to design and facilitate these, and have been doing so for 40 years. And so most of the processes are done in a circle, but this is one that is easy to do by yourself. And there are many times when I've been saved from total sense of confusion and loss, when, like I've been, just stumbling along a street in New York City, just having totally forgotten my purpose and who I am, and a blade of grass coming up between two slabs of concrete winks at me. And so I stop for a moment and exchange gases with the blade of grass, and it fixes me right up. So I can highly recommend that process. And I think it sits well with embodiment as the kind of context for this conversation.
That's so beautiful, so moving in so many ways. I would love to ask you, Skye, to take that wherever you want to go, because I know you are so deep with the plant people in so many ways, and how you might invite people into relationship and experiencing the green world. Um,
Oh, one of my favorite questions. Yeah, well, part of one of the strands in my bow, I suppose, along with the beautiful deep ecology work that I've been mentored in with John, is also the work of Stephen Harrod Buhner. And for those who don't know him, he was an incredible bard and naturalist and author of 25 books on herbalism, and very well known for his protocols on COVID and Lyme's disease and all kinds of things. But he also wrote a series of 5 books that he called his Guide to Contemplative Animism. And within those books, he teaches practices and exercises for helping folks to shift into the direct experience of animist perception, but not just interaction with particular plant beings. That's kind of his gateway, but that the practice kind of evolves from there into connection and conversation with the dreaming body of Earth itself, the anima mundi, and he kind of carrots people in with conversations with plants, and then that's where it ends up. And it's one of the core practices that he teaches is called the exact sensorial imagination. And this has been a practice that I've been doing since I lived in Peru, because that's when I discovered his work. And it's a way for folks to enter into this connection or communication with the other than humans without needing the whole group or the retreat setting that we sometimes don't have access to, or without needing to ingest plant medicines, which a lot of folks don't have access to for various reasons. And it's 2 primary steps. And I'll just say it was really influenced by Goethe, who was a big inspiration to him. And so the 2 primary parts are focusing on developing a lot of sensitivity or opening up what he calls the feeling sense. And the feeling sense involves what he calls heart perception. So it's dropping down from this brain center, this cognitive thinking mind, and down into the chest and the gut, which I know you speak to so beautifully in your work, Erin, all the time. And opening into this feeling sense, which could be articulated as intuition. It's not emotion, but emotion often arises from the feeling sense. So if I were to walk into a building and there's something not quite right about it, there's a feeling that arises like, oh, I should probably get out of here, like there's something not right about this. Or I had a beautiful experience yesterday where I've got these nigella or love in the mist flowers opening up in my garden. I just was sitting with them and I thought, gosh, they really feel really fae to me, like they feel of the fae realm, like fairy, so that's a feeling. It's not an emotion, but my emotion was joy in response to that feeling. So it's really sensitizing oneself to the feelings of the plants, but that the nuance that is possible when you open up that sensory capacity is kind of bottomless in a way. And to the point where Buhner said he was doing this practice for up to 6 hours a day in his early years, and that he was able to tell so much about a plant without even opening a herbal book, from just sitting in its presence, So this is the first part of that practice, and he really emphasizes like honing this part. And when you've got that, then he encourages you to take these feeling-based impressions, which also include impressions from your other senses, the visionary, the auditory, the sense of smell and touch. And then you are invited to enter into a kind of imaginal, hypnagogic or kind of waking dream consciousness. And there's ways that he invites that. A lot of it is actually similar to what John just described, of breathing consciously and circularly with a plant and opening your heart to the being by noticing beauty or giving praise or gratitude. And just this starts to naturally shift your awareness again down. And then you are invited to allow this being and the impressions that you've gathered through your senses to flower in the imaginal realm. And through this sensory organ, because that's how he describes it, the imaginal as a sensory organ, we're able to come into direct dialogue with the other than humans. And again, it takes practice, because a lot of folks have been trained to mistrust the imagination. and to let the imagination kind of move forward. And, you know, I know you two are probably super familiar with traditions. I know the Tibetan tradition trains really deeply in guru yoga and stuff with precise imaginal flowerings that then kind of take on its own life. And that's the key, is the idea or the framework that Buna builds around this practice, is that within the imaginal, beings do have their own independent kind of life, you know, and you're starting to interact with them from this place. And so that's a practice that we do as part of this study group that I run, and it feels really coherent and connected to the deep ecology work. It kind of brings that group work almost into a bit of a personal practice that I can do every day in like the 5 minutes that I have available between running after my toddler and cooking the dinner and hanging the washing. And because that's what my life as a toddler mom looks like. You know, I don't have a lot of time to immerse like I used to. You know, I used to spend days or weeks shedding my human identity and melting into the vastness of my larger identity, and that feels like some years away from me at the moment. So yeah, that's been a really big blessing, that practice.
Mm, that's beautiful. We relate as parents, you know, what you can do in that real life. I just want to bring back this quote I pulled from one of your writings, John, that just feels like it ties together what you both spoke to, and it's so beautiful. Wrote, "What we call feelings inside ourselves now is what remains in us of this ancient intelligence that preceded thinking." It's just so beautiful. I feel like that intelligence is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, when I think about it, I think of the incredible success of my ancestors, that for 4,000 million years, every single one of my ancestors has been intelligent enough to reach the age of reproducing itself before it was consumed. And there have been many challenges during that time, including 5 extinction spasms, where at least 50% of all of the species around at the time died, including the extinction spasm at the end of the Permian era 232 million years ago, when 95% of all of the species of the time became extinct, and my ancestors were never among them. And so this intelligence is honed in every single generation. Any mammal running towards something, wagging its tail when it ought to be running away as fast as it can, doesn't leave its genes in the gene pool. So in every generation, there's selection for the accuracy of these feelings. And so for us to have created a culture and been born into a culture where we're in denial about these feelings, where we're never invited to honor the depth of our anguish and our rage and our terror about what we see going on around us, it kind of both destroys that part of our intelligence, so that the thinking is very beautiful, and I'm not dissing it at all, but I find that it's kind of sterile, that without the passion of the emotions driving it along, merely to know what's going on without feeling it, it doesn't lead to change. It doesn't lead to action. And I think that's why Thich Nhat Hanh once said that the most important thing that we can do for the healing of our world is to hear inside ourselves the sounds of the earth crying. Because unless we're ready to feel that, we're not going to be in a position to address it. That if we keep everything at arm's length by living in our head and not allowing, just the whole hormonal truth of things to guide us the way that it has unerringly guided us for 4,000 million years, we're kind of lost.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I know we both so relate to that from an embodiment perspective. And that line from Thich Nhat Hanh has been such a central teaching. Like, where have we numbed ourselves? Where are we holding tension? Where we're blocking some resonance with this weeping earth? And how do we soften that? And I appreciate so much the emphasis on the practices and the direct experience to have access to that intelligence that's under thought, because it can be so easy with all of the information in the world available through these devices to have ideas of animism or ideas of indigenous soul, or but to really have contexts to grow that experience that could change an identity and participation in the world.
I
I will
was,
say one or two things.
oh,
I
go ahead,
just wanted
Skye.
to
Mhm.
I have also found that the frameworks are so useful to embed those practices within, especially, you know, for me coming from a context where it was more embodied and there wasn't such explicit language or frameworks. It was so much harder for me to actually make sense make and integrate some of the very direct experiences I had, well, the many direct experiences I had of being in a living, breathing world, you know. And I feel like it was actually Joanna Macy who was saying that you won't have contact with the feeling all the time, you know, and that for her, that's where that's why in her workshops she really does emphasize those teaching points in the way that she does, because they need to encircle and hold the practices. And for me, that's been a very important combination. And to the point where now, because I've had those embodied experiences, sometimes the reading of the material actually does carry me there. Like, I don't know if other people ever have that experience,
Yeah.
but so many times people are like, oh, it's just philosophy, or it's just, and I'm like, it isn't. Like, if you've never touched it, sometimes it is true, but if you have, sometimes it has the power to actually carry you back into that experience, which, yeah, I've really loved that and found that to be really important in my, you know, in my own journey of this work.
Mhm.
Oh, it's beautiful. I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and she said, you know, I often feel impatient for other people to care or participate more, you know, in what we might call the great turning toward a more, you know, life-giving way of being human. And she said, my heart has just softened so much because I'm just seeing people have so much with their own pain and their own families and their struggles and just trying to make enough money in the way the world is right now. She said, I just have so much more soft-heartedness. And I'm thinking of listeners listening to us a little bit gleefully talk about feeling the sorrows of the world, because I know we all trust that process. And like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm already overwhelmed. You want me now to open to the sorrows of the earth? Like, what would you say to somebody who's listening to this and like, really? You got to be kidding.
Well, one thing that I'd say is that I too grew up in a culture where the only possible explanation for a pain that I was feeling was that it grew from my own um, biography, from my own life experiences, either something that's happening today or some trauma that I suffered long ago. And there's a tremendous liberation in beginning to consider the possibility that those pains that I'm feeling may well be the pain of the earth. That if the earth's pain was going to be felt anywhere, where would that be except in the human heart? And if we frame every pain that we feel by looking immediately at our inner child, or, you know, being weaned too early, or some trauma that we experienced, then the natural consequences that we immediately start thinking of therapy or something like that. Whereas if we open to the possibility that this could be the earth itself that's crying out to us, then another option becomes that some kind of action in defense of the earth. And so I think it's not that we can bypass our own personal traumas. Of course, these need to be dealt with also, but I find it hugely liberating not to be confined only to those.
It's really beautiful. Um, I would love to also ask Skye, you know, so much changed for me around this when I became a mother, and being a toddler mama, gosh, the importance of this work and the grief we feel on behalf of the future ones. How are you with that? Is it different for you, you know, having your very adorable little one?
Who's turning 2 in like 3 days.
So exciting.
Oh no, it's totally changed. In the one sense, I just remember when I first met John, and your little one River, I think it was only 4 at the time, and John sharing that it's such a radical experience to have a child because you have so much more skin in the game. Those are the words you used, John, and I feel like that has been really true in my experience. Like, especially in the first year of his life, I experienced an increase in anxiety, which I think is not uncommon in the first year postpartum for hormonal reasons, as well as, reasonable reasons. Are they all reasonable reasons? But yeah, just definitely feeling the world that he's going to be entering into, and the pain of that, the grief of that, what's missing. But I think because of the work that I had done with grief and everything before he was born, my primary feeling has actually been more around like the world I want to create around him. And so I guess the truth is that I haven't experienced as much grief as I thought I would, like I imagined that it was going to throw me more deeply into that. But yeah, I feel a kind of I feel rooted in a wider perspective and a deep desire to give him the best tools to meet this, which for me also means being good with feeling. And we practice something called aware parenting, which I feel is actually really in alignment with deep ecology, in the sense that right from birth we have normalized tears and tantrums and the feeling and emotions. That there has always been let's check if there are any needs that are being missed out on, and if not, we're actually just going to show up and be like really connected and centered in ourselves while we hold space for what's coming through. And it's so similar in many ways to the skill set of attending someone through a ceremony or in a grief ritual, individual or a group. So yeah, that's what I'm finding. But yeah, there are definitely moments like when, the wars increased. I think it was last year now. I felt like the midnight 3 a.m. wake up breastfeeding, and inevitably, these things come rushing in when everything else is quiet and no one else is around. And it's there. It's definitely there. But I would also say there's less space for going too deeply into it and processing it. I feel like my orientation towards feeling it enough to keep moving is kind of what's really present for me at the moment. And then I'm sure I'll need to enter a big grief ritual in a year or two, and I feel like the space is there for that again, which doesn't feel like it's there right now.
Yeah, thank you. It's tender.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to ask a question. John, you've used this term, the religion of economics, and I'd love to hear both of you respond a little bit about the challenges of doing this kind of animist soul deep ecology work within the religion of economics. What are ways that you imagine out of this trance that has taken over so much of the planet? And just, yeah, anything to speak about that.
You want to start us off, Skye?
Sure. Yeah, I find it difficult, definitely. And it feels like for me one of my golden threads in a way. Like it's a passion that I have to find a pathway through it. And I guess where I'm at with it right now is that I feel like it's unlikely that we'll see the full fruition of the reclamation of animist consciousness across the planet in my lifetime. I hope, and I always hold space for miracles and radical change, of course. But I feel for me, what's the most important thing is that this impulse feels really deeply true to keep following this, and that I'm focused on cultivating in my local region, in my local community, and creating webs where we can hold each other. Like, it's clear to me that particularly when it comes to worldview and consciousness, the culture exerts such a strong force on the way that we perceive. And this is also true even if you're not in active dialogue, even if you're surrounded by people who hold these other values as true. The systems we engage in throughout the day are founded on this disconnected kind of other way of being that pull our energy along certain pathways, right? And we, I believe, are wired to kind of resonate with the worldview of our culture and the larger community that we're embedded in, for reasons of like really good reasons. Like, we're safer when we resonate with our tribe, right? And so for me, it's been important to create small practice communities, which is part of what the work that I've been focusing on this last year is about, where folks are kind of trained into this exact sensorial imagination practice I was just speaking to, where we are given the framework and the language of what we call eco-animism and mystical animism. And then we create non-hierarchical, self-organized practice communities around that. And in the deep ecology work, we're doing something similar, where I'll let John speak to that, around what's this concept of what he calls the deepenings, which is a similar idea. So there's these ways that we're trying to seed, I guess, islands of new ways of seeing, not new old ways of seeing and being. And that feels like the way to go. And for me, something Joanna taught about that has stayed with me forever is this idea of picking up that golden thread and participating in the emergent intelligence of this Gaian system, and finding a way to release the need to see the results of your outcome or the fruits of your actions, because there's such a way in which that limits our ability to take action, right? And if you understand emergent intelligence and systems theory, which is something she was so passionate about, when you get that transmission, there is an understanding that we are participating, our individual actions are participating in patterns that we will never see the shape of, right? Over time scales. And that's another beautiful thing about the deep time work, because I feel like it helps us to release ourselves into movements that go beyond lifetimes. And this for me feels really important, no matter what we're doing in this moment, is to hold that larger story in mind, and just follow the thread that feels like it's coming from somewhere deeper and wider and older than my human mind, of what I should be doing at this time and how it should look, and if I stay true to that, it feels like things will be all right, maybe not in the sense that it'll work out how I want it to, but it will be all right in a deeper sense. So yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Well, yes to all of that, Skye, and thank you. And I guess what I'd like to add is that one thing that I think is necessary is for us to first recognize that economics is a religion, that it audaciously disguises itself as a science, and not only a science, but the only one of the social sciences hard enough to have its own Nobel Prize, whereas it's based upon these completely fictitious and ridiculous premises, such as infinite growth is possible on a finite planet. And as a result, it means that we're digging up the earth in order to extract billions of years of fossilized sunlight. And the economics of that is that we have to sell it at a slight margin beyond the cost of digging it up, because if we added more than a slight margin, someone would undercut us. And the pollution of soil and water and climate from the residues of that process are external to the economic equation. So this is an entirely religious, and so I would say the most pious religion that the world has ever known, and that it's important to recognize that. And I'd recommend to listeners to just look my name up and the religion of economics, and I've written extensively about it. Having said that, in the deep ecology experiential immersions that I've been practicing more and more lately because they've been becoming more and more popular. The hippies and pagans and witches that always were very enthusiastic continue to attend, but now it's also very everyday people, IT professionals, professors, university professors, and even the odd senator has started showing up at the workshops, and I'm training many co-facilitators. Every workshop now I have 2 or 3 co-facilitators because I have a what's happening is congruent with the possibility that this work is going to explode in the next few years. Let's see what happens. And but one of the things that's clear to me is that every Indigenous society has ceremonies and rituals, and what we're doing is synchronous with those. It's not that we're imitating those, but they appear to serve the same purpose, that when we look at the ceremonial life of every Indigenous society that has maintained its ceremonial life, we always find that many times throughout the year, people practice things that appear to be for the purpose of making sure that the humans don't forget all our relations, don't forget the interconnectedness that we have with the living earth, and allow, thereby we tend to the roots that connect us to the living earth. We don't allow ourselves to separate. So bears don't need to do ceremonies like that. It appears to be something that only human beings need to do. And perhaps it's because once we started to develop this cognition, the tendency to separate out, the tendency to disappear into merely social conceptions of self emerged, and that every society that has not become extinct has found the need to correct for those tendencies. And that's what we find in these ceremonies. And so we moderns perhaps are the first humans in 250,000 years that have imagined that we can dispense with these as empty ritual or mumbo jumbo. So that when we come together, there's a tremendous sense of coming home. Everybody attests to the fact that this, just the space that it takes us to, is so familiar and so warm, but it's so short-lived that within days, or if we're very zealous sharing gases with plants, maybe weeks, we're entirely re-inhabited by the social world that we swim in. And so where that's taken me to is the need to create a culture where these things become available to us. And so workshops where people pay a facilitator to take them on this experience, it's a good way to start. But now we've started what we're calling deepening ceremonies, where alumni of the deep ecology workshops, anybody who's had the experience of one deep ecology workshop and wants more, can come and do these practices together, but it's free of charge. And everybody just chips in to cover the cost of doing it, and seeing whether we, and it's also meant that I've cancelled all of the workshops that I had planned. I'm only working in Australia these days. I spent half my life traveling the world. I've used up many lifetimes of carbon, and I'm not flying outside Australia any longer. But now I'm confining myself to Sydney and Melbourne because these are the places that have the most, the groundwork's been done. And I'm hoping that in one of these, this culture will emerge where in a few years' time, you'll be able to just go to an app on your phone and find out where the deepening is happening near you this coming weekend. And, just to try and find some way to turn it into more than like a fantastic experience that I had at a workshop one day, and then it's just back to business as usual.
I'm really moved that you're talking about making culture. That really does feel so important out of this. And as you're speaking, you're reminding me of a conversation I had with our friend Francis Weller a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about, he describes himself as a soul activist, which is a little different than just marching in the streets or posting, outrage online and what the many ways people engage in activism. And he was saying, I think we need to understand resistance and remembrance as really close to each other. And what you're saying about these, what feels familiar when we're enacting some rituals of remembrance, that is a resistance to that overculture and the religion of economics and all this harm doing. So I'm really just moved by that. Thank you. And I want to ask a question. You were just talking about being in Australia, and a random senator shows up sometimes at your workshops. I know you received a prestigious award in '95, is that it? From the Australian government for your work. And I'm curious, do you feel supported by that culture now in the 2020s? Is there like governmental celebration of what you're doing, or trying to suppress? Or I'm just curious about how that is for you.
Oh no, definitely trying to suppress, and it's a different era than it was 30 years ago. And interestingly, I came into this from a decade as a direct activist, blockading, getting arrested, and so on. And last year, 12 months ago, I was arrested for the first time in 25 years at a blockade, a kayak blockade of the world's largest coal port at Newcastle on the New South Wales coast, where 1% of all of the world's greenhouse gases pass through that port as coal being exported. And of course, with the cooking of the books that the religion of economics routinely practices, these greenhouse gases don't appear on Australia's ledger. Then 2 months ago, I was arrested for the first time in 25 years at a forest blockade, trying to protect the beautiful gliders and koalas and other endangered species in a forest not far from my home. And I locked onto what's quaintly called a harvester. Harvesting, you would think, refers to something that you planted. But anyway, it's called a harvester. And I was locked on for 7 hours by the neck to this machine, and stopped logging for a day. And the policeman who arrested me said, "Oh, you've done this before, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "In fact, this reminds me of a time nearly 40 years ago, a very similar situation when I was arrested in the nightcap rainforest. And however, they dropped the charges before I had my day in court, because in the meantime, they declared the Nightcap National Park, which is now part of the World Heritage. And so instead of some penalty, I was given an Order of Australia medal. I said, this time I'm hoping for a knighthood.
That's so it should be.
So I'd better explain that this is funny because Australians don't get knighthoods. So this
Well,
it's a
whoever gives
British.
them out on the planet ought to give you one for sure. Yeah, thanks for that story.
I'd love to ask you both. I know Stephen Harrod Buhner has taught a lot about this, and Michael Mead, this notion of like a unique genius, that we all have some unique medicine that comes through us and our metabolized history and traumas and all of that. What supports for each of you people finding what their own soul medicine is, and their own with what is within their reach to touch and bring their medicine to?
Start with that. Yeah, this was a big theme in Stephen Herod Buhner's work, and it centers around his idea of the golden threads and learning to listen to the golden threads. And so the same practice I outlined before, the exact sensorial imagination, is for him part of the fruit of kind of deepening into that practice, is being able to listen for the golden threads, which is this idea that, you know, just as the cells of my body are participating in, you know, all kinds of actions that lead to, you know, the coherence of sky, possibly and probably without their knowledge that they're doing so, that we all have these kind of I guess would the word be ideal, maybe kind of like deeper pathways that we could be following that allow us to participate in this kind of coherent larger body that is Gaia, that is Earth. And that part of the ability to do that is, once again, training in this capacity for deeper listening. And for him, this feeling sense in combination with the imaginal is where that kind of communication and deep listening happens. So it's a consciousness outside of our normal everyday consciousness that allows us to pick those threads up and then to follow them. And yeah, this has been a pretty profound teaching for me that has been really kind of linked to what Joanna speaks to in, you know, participating in emergent intelligence, what some of the other teachers I really love speak to, like Bill Plotkin in Animus Valley talks about the ecological niche, that we all have these very kind of specific roles to play as part of a coherent Gaian system. And yeah, that for me is part of what I call perceptual activism. So we talked about Francis Wheeler's soul activism. I feel like there's different kinds of activisms, and this is also something that Joanna Macy teaches so beautifully about in her dimensions of activism. And for me, part of perceptual activism is this capacity of learning to listen to and follow the golden threads. So yeah, that's what I'll say to that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, maybe I'll a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is that for myself, when I am in need of guidance, what I like to do, and I think it might work for other people the same, is that first I remember who I really am underneath this social identity. I remember that every cell in my body is descended in an unbroken chain from the first cell of life on Earth. Every atom in my body was created in the supernova explosions of ancient stars. That's who I am, regardless of who I usually think I am. That's the reality. And then I might, for example, find a quiet spot in the forest and bury myself in leaves, lie with my body against the earth, bury myself in leaves. And what I put out is that I wish to be guided by my enthusiasm, that if the earth is going to speak to me, that I wish to be addressed by my enthusiasm. And then I find that whatever I'm enthusiastic about after that tends to flower. That it's difficult to do things because we ought to do them, or because, you know, and in any case, you know, altruism, as Arnie Ness pointed out, is a treacherous basis for conservation, because alter is the other. And so altruism only works if you're doing something for the other. But once you realize there is no other, that it's all cycling through itself, that it's all cycling through me and I'm cycling through it, then it's just, anyway, so I just find that praying for enthusiasm is very powerful, and that you can trust what comes up after that. And the other thing is, at the end of a 48-hour deep ecology immersion, Joanna has various stages in the spiral of the work that reconnects. We go from gratitude to honoring our pain for the world, to seeing with new eyes, and then to going forth. How do we take this out into the world? And one of the going forth exercises that I think speaks to the question that you asked is sometimes I will get everybody to have, you know, their journal or just a pen and a piece of paper, and write at the top, dear, your own name. So, you know, it might be, dear Carl, this is your mother Gaia, and then just write. and see what comes. And at the end of that, it's the end of the workshop. There's not time for everybody to share, but I ask for 2 or 3 people to share. And there's always 2 or 3 people who've had the most incredible instructions for their life that come through just through imagining that they're getting a letter from their mother Gaia, and this is what comes out of their own hand. So this is also another process that I think anybody could try and see what happens. It might work for you.
Beautiful. Oh, I love both those responses that you offered. Thank you.
I might also mention another one quickly, which John often does, which is so beautiful, called the Corvette exercise, where, you know, we might have gone through a process like this letter, and where folks have then found a kind of thread that they might want to unfold. And then we sit in a circle of 4 people, and you're kind of sharing this thread and your vision and your dream. And then the other 3 people take different roles to reflect back to you. So one is often an ancestor, the other one is often a descendant, and then usually an other than human, or sometimes it can be the voice of doubt. You know, that's also one that sometimes gets thrown in there, and you just hear from these different perspectives, and it's incredible what comes out when people really drop their self-identity and allow these older voices, or the voices yet to come, or the voices from the other than humans in response to those threads.
I love that. That is one of my favorite practices, Skye, to do. And I know the first time we did it with including the voice of doubt, people were like, what? I'm supposed to do that? But when it's sort of externalized, like, you're not going to make time for that. You can't do it. It doesn't matter. Like, it's external. And then you hear the ancestors' encouragement and the herons' encouragement and the future ones saying, thank you. You know, oh, I'm just have the goosebumps.
Me too. It's such a beautiful exercise.
Just thanks for making this work and being so generous and sharing it. It's really, wow, I'm so moved by that. Okay, we could keep talking to y'all for hours, but I want to try to close in on closing questions and comments. I know that we share a love of poetry. And I was wondering, I didn't prime you for this, but if you have a poem, because poetry speaks so beautifully to what's hard to speak to sometimes, you know, almost speaks to that feeling intelligence. So one question is, do you have a poem you'd like to share? And then I also am curious, I'm just going to put, a link to this in the chat in case you don't have it handy. John, if you would be willing to read also the Earth Prayer. And if there's something else you'd rather share, we are wide open to whatever you'd both like to bring.
Well, if John is willing to recite some Robinson Jeffers, which is, you know, as Joanna is guided so deeply by Rilke, I feel like John is in relationship with the spirit of Robinson Jeffers, who could be considered one of the fathers of deep ecology as well. I don't know how you feel about that, John.
Yeah, I'm never shy to share Robinson Jeffers. It's been a huge part in my own development. He was a famous poet in his youth. He was on the cover of Time magazine when he was still in his 20s. Everyone loved his poetry. This is like in the 1920s, I think. And but he fell out of favor when he became so disillusioned with the development of his beloved nature, and he forged a philosophy which he sarcastically called inhumanism. And so I'd like to share one of his inhumanist poems called Passenger Pigeons. I'm realizing that you told me that many of your listeners aren't from the United States. So maybe if I was just talking to the United States, I wouldn't need to say this, of course. But for people outside the United States, I'll say that passenger pigeons were once the most numerous bird that the world had ever known. The tales of the early explorers are unimaginable, the size of the flocks of these birds. If anything was proof against extinction, surely it was the passenger pigeon. However, a huge Mechanized industry grew up in the middle of the 19th century. Trainloads of passenger pigeon carcasses arrived in New York and Chicago daily. It was the only meat that was cheap enough for poor people and slaves to eat. And the last passenger pigeon, named Martha, died in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1917. So this is Robinson Jeffers' reflections on that. Slowly, the passenger pigeons increased. Then, suddenly, their numbers became enormous. They would flatten 10 miles of forest when they flew down to roost, and the cloud of their rising eclipsed the dawn. They became too many. They are all dead. Not one is left. And the American bison, their hordes would hide a prairie from horizon to horizon, great heads and storm cloud shoulders, a torrent of life. How many are left? For a time, for a few years, their bones turned wide prairies white. You, death, you watch for these things, these explosions of life. They're your food. They make your feasts. But turn those great rolling eyes away from humanity, those grossly craving black eyes. It is true we increase. A man from Britain, landing in Gaul when Rome had fallen, he journeyed 14 days through that beautiful rich land, the orchards and rivers and the looted villas. He reports that he saw no living man. But now we fill up the gaps. In spite of wars and famines and pestilences, we are quite suddenly 3 billion people. Our bones too would make wide prairies white, a beautiful snow of unburied bones. Bones that have twitched and quivered in nights of love. Bones that have shaken with laughter and hung slack in sorrow. Strong bones broken on the rack, coward bones worn out with trembling, broad bones gnarled with hard labour, and the little bones of sweet young children, and the white, empty skulls, little carved ivory wine jugs that used to contain love and passion and thought and insane delirium where now not even worms dwell. Respect humanity, death, these shameless black eyes of yours. It is not necessary to take all at once. Besides, you cannot do it. We are too powerful. We are men, not pigeons. We have still history to make. For look now at our achievements. We have bridled the cloud leaper, lightning, a lion whipped by a man to carry our messages and work our will. Oh, that was little and last year. For now, we have taken the primal powers, creation and annihilation. We can make new elements such as God never saw. We can explode atoms and annul the fragments. Nothing left but pure energy. We shall use it in peace and war. Very clever, he answered in his thin, piping voice, cruel and a eunuch. Roll those idiot black eyes of yours on the field beasts, not on intelligent man. We are not in your order. You watched the dinosaurs grow into horror. They had been efts in the ditches and presently became enormous, with heaving flanks and tearing teeth, plated with armour. Nothing could stand against them. Nothing but you, death, and they died. You watched the saber-toothed tigers grow those enormous fangs, unnecessary as our sciences. You have their bones in the oil pits and layer rock. You will not have ours. With pain and labour we have bought intelligence. We have counted the stars and half understood them. We have watched the farther galaxies fleeing away from us, wild herds of panic horses, or else a trick of distance deceived the prism. We can outfly falcons and eagles and meteors, faster than sound, higher than the nourishing air. We have enormous privilege. We do not fear you. We have invented the jet plane, and the death bomb and the cross of Christ. Oh, he said, surely you'll live forever. Grinning like a skull, hiding his mouth with his hand. What could exterminate you?
Wow.
A little sobering Robinson Jeffers.
Oh, magnificently read too. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Phew. I just want to take a breath and let that land before we take in maybe more poetry. Oh, wow. Mm.
One of my favorite things is listening to John speak Robinson Jefferson poetry. Well, I can speak one, and it's a really short one in comparison. And this is by one of my favorite poets, and it was also one of Stephen Howard Buhner's favorite poets, William Stafford, which I'm sure you both know. It's called The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread.
Mm.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Both of those. Magnificent.
Praise the poets.
Praise the poets. Thanks for inviting that.
Well, John and Skye, thank you so much. As Aaron said, we could spend all day just following all the tributaries that could flow. But it's been such a delight and honor to speak with you both.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
So good
And
to see
thank you. Thank you both for your work in the world and your commitment to the world that future generations are going to inhabit.
And to the thread.
To the thread.
Thread. Yes.
To the thread.
To the
Twice.
thread. And as you sign off on your emails, Sean, for the earth. So beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.